second witness knows that. This is revealed to his servants, the prophets, and the first witness will come in. This is signed by Robert E. Robb, presiding overseer. These are the princes, you know. They have elected them. Men have elected these princes. And yet we find that the princes in Israel were never elected by men, not the true princes. Yahweh selected them. William Powell, field overseer. Robert A. Costa, Bible study overseer. The last one had a hand in my disfellowship. The others I don't even know. As I say, it's sad in one way, and it's actually a step forward and a time really of rejoicing, because you know that the separation must come. It must come. If there is no separation, then you have not made any progress. Yahweh bless you. It's a joy to know that you have strength to stand these things. The devil does these things to try to make you feel so bad that you feel like quitting, feel like cracking up. He does these things. Persecute you. But it's a joy. Yes?
Why do they send it now?
They had a hearing and they gave you another week or something, didn't they? What did they expect? You to come back to them?
To come back to them and they ask forgiveness and they say,
Pardon? Pretty soon they'll be pulling their hair. All right, let's turn to the 35th chapter of Numbers briefly. Then I'm going to take the 11th chapter of Revelation later. Your daughter feels she lost you?
She cried and she said she lose me.
Well, it's going to be a little rough, but it's only the beginning. And if her heart's right, I know it is. She'll come in. Numbers 35, we'll start with verse 9. Okay. Numbers 35, verse 9. And the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, Speak unto the children of Israel, and say unto them, When ye be come over Jordan into the land of Canaan, or when you get to Canaan, then ye shall appoint you cities to be cities of refuge for you, that the slayer may flee thither, which killeth any person at unawares or by error. Right now, Yahweh established 6 cities of refuge, that anyone who slew somebody accidentally, he could flee into this city, and the avenger of blood could not get at him when he was in this city of refuge. If he was caught outside, he would be killed. But he had a provision made, Yahweh had a provision made in the city of refuge, and there were 6 of them, where they could flee until he was heard. All right. And they shall be unto you cities for refuge from the avenger. In other words, there was one who actually did the slaughtering, slew those who shed blood. Anyone who shed blood willfully was slain. Now Yahweh provided a city of refuge for those who had committed murder unawares or by accident. In other words, a murder that was not their fault. And they shall be unto you cities for refuge from the avenger, that the manslayer die not. Right? That the one who has committed the deed would not die, until he stand before the congregation in judgment. So the purpose of the judgments was to see whether the slaughter, whether the death was accidental, really accidental, or whether it was premeditated, whether he actually wanted to kill this man. So you see, Yahweh is deciphering between willful wickedness and accident. And there was a provision made for those who sinned unwillingly. And of these cities which ye shall give, 6 cities shall ye have for refuge. You shall give 3 cities on this side Jordan, and 3 cities shall give in the land of Canaan, which shall be cities of refuge. These 6 cities shall be a refuge both for the children of Israel, and for the stranger, and for the sojourner among them, that every one that killeth any person unawares, accidentally, may flee thither. Okay, now the same rules apply for all, Israel or the stranger class. So Yahweh is a just God when it comes to handing out judgments. And if he smite him with an instrument of iron so that he die, he is a murderer. The murderer shall surely be put to death. In other words, if you got something in your hand and you know it's going to kill somebody, and you hit that man purposely with it, you know what it's going to do. This man is a murderer. He shall be put to death. In other words, no one has a right to take another man's life. That man's life is just as good as yours. And if you deem that you can go ahead and slaughter other people willfully, this person must die. Alright? And if he smite him with a throwing stone, wherewith he may die, and he die, he is a murderer. The murderer shall surely be put to death. Now this is willful sin. Now what Yahweh is discerning here between willful sin, your own sin, and sin that you cannot help. What it boils down to is willful violation and imperfection. This is what he's telling me. All right? Or if he smite him with a hand weapon of wood, wherewith he may die, and he die, he is a murderer. The murderer shall surely be put to death. The revenger of blood himself shall slay the murderer. When he meeteth him, he shall slay him. Okay, now this is all willful murder. But if he thrust him of hatred, or hurl at him by laying of weight that he die, or in enmity smite him with his hand that he die, he that smote him shall surely be put to death, for he is a murderer. In other words, if he had former hatred for this person, or hurl at him by laying in wait that he die, in other words, ambush him, this is all premeditated, or in enmity smite him with enmity, with hatred, with his hand that he die, he that smote him shall surely be put to death, for he is a murderer. The revenger of blood shall slay the murderer when he meeteth him. But if he thrust him subtly without enmity, or have cast upon him anything without laying of weight, in other words, unintentional, without hatred, without premeditation, okay, or with any stone wherewith a man may die, seeing him not. In other words, you throw the stone, you don't see him, the stone happens to hit him. In fact, there was a little birthday party there at Bonnie's, and the kid threw a stone, just missed another kid's head, and just threw it. And, you wonder what's in those kids' minds sometimes. They don't think at all. It could have hurt somebody. It made me think of this when I was reading it. In other words, an accidental death. And cast it upon him that he died, and was not his enemy, neither sought his harm. Then the congregation shall judge between the slayer and the revenger of blood according to these judgments. The judgments are, was it intentional or was it not? It's not what he did, why it happened. So they get right down to the root of the thing. And the congregation shall deliver the slayer out of the hand of the revenger of blood, and the congregation shall restore him to the city of his refuge, whither he has fled, and he shall abide in it unto the death of the high priest, which was anointed with the holy oil. Okay. This means that he must stay in the city of refuge as a protection until the high priest dies. This means that the sin which he has committed involuntarily, which actually pictures inherited sin, would only be delivered when the priesthood was changed. Now, Yahweh made pictures of this. When the high priest was changed, this pictured a change in the law. This meant that when the true high priest came, we would be under the law of mercy. So what he did to make pictures, because they lived so many years in the type, he couldn't wait until Yahshua came. The man wouldn't live that long. So what happened, when the high priest was here and the crime was committed, he had to stay in the city of refuge until the priest died, till the high priest died. Then when another high priest replaced him, he could come out. He could live. He would not die for his unintentional sin or for his inherited sin. All right. But if the slayer shall at any time come without the border of the city of his refuge, whither he has fled, and the revenger of blood find him without the border of the city of his refuge, and the revenger of blood kill the slayer, he shall not be guilty of blood. Okay, now, this pictures a class of people who act on their own. This class of people is not waiting for the Redeemer, is not waiting for the true high priest. This class of people tries to deliver themselves. They use their own intelligence, and this man who would step out of the city of refuge was actually taking steps on his own and disregarding the plan of Yahweh altogether. He meets death. This means that the man who has sinned involuntarily, who has inherited sin, becomes a willful sinner by transgressing the law of Yahweh. He becomes from transgressing the law of Yahweh. He becomes from a born sinner, inherited sinner. He becomes a willful sinner, and he will die. Because he should have remained in the city of his refuge until the death of the high priest. But after the death of the high priest, the slayer shall return into the land of his possession. Okay? Now let's turn to Hebrews 4. I will start with verse 14. Hebrews 4:14. Seeing then that we have a great high priest that is passed into the heavens, Jesus the Son of God, let us hold fast our profession, or our faith, our religion, our belief. In other words, this is the fulfillment of all things. He is the high priest that fulfills everything that was typified. And any of the sins that were committed before the authority of this high priest came, before the person actually reached an understanding of this high priest, would be forgiven when they would accept this high priest, the true high priest, when they would become obedient to him. They would be forgiven. This is inheritance. For we have not a high priest which cannot be touched with the feeling of our infirmities, but was in all points tempted like as we were, yet without sin. Now, in other words, he's not a high priest that you can't reach. He's acquainted with everything. He became a man and came down and experienced everything with us. And he knows what's in man. So when man is helpless because of sin, pleads to him, he can understand. Yahweh being a just God, he would not allow an angel to rule over man who has never been a man. To be just, he brings him down here and lets him live as a man, and lets him get kicked around like a man, and suffer as a man. Okay, now the only thing that Yahshua did not experience, the only thing that he did not experience was imperfection. The imperfection in his body never led him all over. It never possessed his mind. It never possessed his body. He was perfect. He never even thought a wrong thought. So what are we going to do about that? How can he judge imperfect men? Well, not only has he been given all wisdom, but he has associated with him 144,000 kings and priests who have been imperfect. They were all like us. Paul crying out. He says, what I want to do, I don't do. What I don't want to do, I do. Oh, cursed person that I am. He knows that flesh is leading him. He knows he could not control himself. So these priests experienced everything you experience. And they know what you're going through. And they will take you from where you are and lift you right up to perfection, regardless what you are. This is the provision that Yahweh has made. Let us therefore come boldly into the throne of grace, that we may obtain mercy and find grace to help in time of need. In other words, to come boldly. Don't be afraid. A lot of people say, I don't deserve it. I don't deserve this blessing of this kingdom. Why me? Who am I that I should receive such a blessing? Who are you? Just like anybody else. This is what's going to make the kingdom. This is what the human race has been reduced to, through imperfections. This is what Yahweh allows to show you what happens if you do not follow him. And you will learn your lesson once and for all. And it will bring you out of imperfection into perfection, and that you may enjoy the beauties of his creation forever. Now in chapter 5, he says, for every high priest taken from among men is ordained for men in things pertaining to God, that he may offer both gifts and sacrifices for sins. All right, now these are the high priests that were chosen, who can have compassion on the ignorant and on them that are out of the way, for that he himself also is compassed with infirmity. In other words, he understands because he also has the same faults. And by reason hereof, he ought, as for the people, so also for himself, to offer for sins. In other words, the high priests of old, the imperfect high priests, they offered sins for the sacrifice for the sins of the people. But before he did for the people, he had it offered for himself, because he was also sinful. Now, Yahshua doesn't have to do that. He's perfect. All right. And no man taketh this honor unto himself, but he that is called of God, as was Aaron. In other words, no man can do this and become a high priest or forgive the sins or even become any kind of a priest, such as we have in the Catholic churches or anything. No man can do this thing. Unless he's called of God, as was Aaron. Now, in the type, Aaron was called. The way says he would make him a high priest. You don't just do this yourself. See? So also Christ glorified not himself to be made a high priest, but he that said unto him. In other words, Yahshua didn't take this himself. Even though he was the Son of God, he didn't take this position himself. We see the nerve of these priests and ministers who go to school and say, I'm going to become a priest or a minister. And here the Son of God never even did it. His Father told him. Otherwise he would have never become a high priest. But he that said unto him, Thou art my Son, today have I begotten thee. As he saith also in another place, Thou art a priest forever, after the order of Melchizedek. All right? Then he goes on, who in the days of his flesh, when he had offered up prayers and supplications with strong crying and tears unto him that was able to save him from death, and was heard in that he feared, though he were a son, yet learned he obedience by the things which he suffered. Okay. You see, you wonder why you're chastised? Look at what his beloved Son went through. Even though he was perfect, look at what he went through. He had to remain faithful. He not only unto death, but with his death, it appeared as though the devil had won altogether. Where is this man? Where is this Son of God? He saved others. Himself he can't save. Everything went down the drain. Strike the shepherd and the sheep were scattered. Everyone deserted him. It looked like everything was a complete failure. This is what he was crying for primarily, because he knew the reproach it would bring upon his Father, that when he died, it would appear that the devil had won. Though he were a son, yet learned he obedience by the things which he suffered, and being made perfect, he became the author of eternal salvation unto all them that obey him. Now this doesn't mean he was imperfect, but his obedience was tried and proven perfect. In other words, he had to go through this to prove, to honor his Father, to prove that he was worthy of this position. And Yahweh knows that he will never, never, never do what the devil did. So what did Yahweh do? How did he reward him? He gave him all power, heaven and earth, all wisdom, complete. He made him the express image of himself. He can trust him altogether. He made him equal with himself. Now this is, he went the limit. He proved beyond a shadow of a doubt that he would never abandon his Father for anything. He'd rather take the biggest disgrace, death, insults, and have nothing, and remain true to his Father, rather than seek any relief whatsoever. Now let's turn to the 11th chapter of Revelation. Many of you have heard this, and some have not. This is the reason I'm bringing it out again, not only because some of you have not heard it, but repetition always adds something to the understanding. And there was given me a reed like unto a rod, and the angel stood, saying, Rise and measure the temple of God and the altar, and them that worship therein. All right, now the temple was in the heavens. Peter said that we, as living stones, make up a spiritual temple. So what he was actually measuring was the heavenly ruling organization. And when he says to measure it, and them that worship therein, in other words, this would include those who were in the temple, made up the ruling organization. In other words, count them, which would total to 144,000. This is the heavenly organization. Now, the reason that we understand why this should be measured is that it was now cleansed and it totally belonged to Yahweh. In other words, there was no interference. This takes place after the devil is cast out. Now the next line, the next verse gives you a clue why this was measured, because it tells you why the earthly portion is not measured. But the court which is without the temple leave out, and measure it not, for it is given unto the Gentiles, and the holy city shall they tread under foot 42 months. Now this verse says a lot. Not only the earthly portion is not cleansed and not ready to be measured when the heavens are, but what it's also telling you is that it will be completely controlled by the Gentiles for 42 months. So actually there was no time to measure it at all. After the heavens were cleansed, don't measure the earth at all, because the devil was still here. His organization is still here, so what could you measure that belonged to Yahweh? The devil has the whole world. The devil has the whole world. There was nothing to measure. But he also tells you that the holy city shall be tread under foot 42 months. Now what is the holy city? The city symbolizes an organization. A holy organization would be a pure organization without fault, devoted to Yahweh. This is his kingdom. So this means that the earthly portion of his kingdom would already have been established, but the filth of the world was still here, and the devil was down on earth with the kingdom of Yahweh, and that finally the devil's organization would completely trample on the holy city for 42 months, indicating that they will trample it underfoot and cause the holy city to stop all operations as far as the preaching work is concerned. Now, before this happens, he goes on to tell us what is going to happen. The authority that he gives his two witnesses, and what happens after their mission is complete. And I will give power unto my two witnesses, and they shall prophesy 1,260 days, clothed in sackcloth. This is the period of time that we are now in. His two witnesses would prophesy for this period of time. Now, many people think if the two witnesses are 200 million, shouldn't the 200 million be here so that we can prophesy for the 1,260 days? No. The 1,260 days actually begins and it gathers the 200 million. It gathers some of the first witness, it gathers some of the second witness, and together they grow. And it'll take the whole 1,260 days to gather the whole 200 million. But the idea is that the work is the same. As they keep coming, it just grows in strength. It's like the prophecy in Ezekiel, where it starts with a trickle and the water gets deeper and deeper and deeper as time passes, until the trickle of water becomes a great river that no one could walk across at all. You'd have to swim. In other words, until the testimony gets completely out of hand. This is when everybody will be talking about it in different houses without you even being there. They'll all be talking about it. You couldn't stop it if you wanted it. This is how it gains in volume. And when it gains the pitch, the fever pitch, in the very last moment of this testimony, and the devil's agents will say, enough, that's it, we can't take any more. And they stop it. They outlaw us. And they really take some steps. You won't even be able to buy or sell. If you can't eat, you're finished. This is one reason why we have to leave. And another reason why is because they're going to annihilate themselves. There's another reason why they have to. We can't stay here. Now, the two witnesses clothed in sackcloth, this is mourning, clothes of mourning. This is black cloth. This is what many people wear when someone dies. So what's the sorrow about? Actually, it's a work of rejoicing. But the devil's going to see to it that you're not going to get too much happiness. Because with every blessing, there's going to be a curse. And it's going to be balanced, pretty well balanced. So the more people come in, the more we should rejoice, but the greater the persecution. That's the way it's going to be. There's not much persecution now. But there's not many people. And as it increases, the two will increase side by side until the work is finished. You prepare yourself for that. It's not going to be easy. But as long as your Holy Spirit is with you, you will have a healthy outlook toward the whole thing. You'll know this has to be. If it was not this way, you would be sick. You would be not serving. You would not serve your way at all. You have to have the opposition to be on the right side. Because your course is one course, the devil's course is another course. And as long as you take the course contrary to the devil, you're going to meet opposition. The minute the opposition stops, you're flowing with the devil. You're going with the tide. So if everything is right, beware. You're wrong. You have to meet opposition. So he says, these are the two olive trees. All right, these are the two olive trees and the two candlesticks standing before the God of the earth. An olive tree is a fruit-bearing tree. In other words, these are the people who bear fruit. These are the people who gather an increase. Now, there's a lot of people gathering increases. But he who does not gather with me scatters abroad. There's only the true gatherers are those who are truly working for Yahweh. The others that are being gathered for destruction. So those who are truly bearing fruit alone are the true witnesses.